As a manager, one of your most powerful tools in the planning and control functions is the use of budgets. If budgets are properly prepared and utilized, they provide a powerful tool for the planning function and the control function. In Chapter 9, you may recall you focused on the preparation of budgets, and in Chapter 10, we are now focusing on the control aspect of budgets. In this particular problem, solution walkthrough, I selected problem 10.3b, and we are going to prepare a flexible budget which will then be compared against actual performance to determine favorable or unfavorable variances. In this particular problem, we have Hardesty Company, and they estimated their budget on a 50,000 unit production each month, which would translate into 600,000 units for the year, 12 times 50,000. And so in this first column, we have their budgeted variable cost and their budgeted fixed cost. Recall that your variable cost on a per unit basis is fixed, however, on a total basis varies. And so if we took each of these line items and divided it by the total number of units of 50,000, that would give us the cost per unit. We can do the same for our fixed cost, but remember that fixed cost in total stays the same. However, on a per unit basis, it would vary. You will notice that in this particular problem, the actual results are juxtaposed with the budgeted line items, and we see unfavorable results for each of these line items. For example, direct materials was budgeted at $40,000 and the actual was 41, and so correctly that's an unfavorable variance. The problem is that the actual is based on a different level of activity. It's based on the production in May of 55,000 units as opposed to the budgeted 50,000 units. And so in order for us to compare apples with apples, we need to have a budget that is based on the 55,000 units as opposed to the 50,000 units. And so one of the things we're asked to do is to prepare a budget report based on, so we're going to use the data for May in order to prepare a flexible budget for comparison. The first thing they want us to do is to state the total monthly budgeted cost formula, which is total fixed cost plus variable cost per unit. And so to get your variable cost per unit, you would take your total variable cost of 130,000 and divide that by the 50,000 units, and we get $2.60. Notice that with this formula, we could then estimate what the total cost should be for any level of activity within the relevant range for this corporation. For example, if they were producing at 90,000 units, assuming that's within the relevant range, we would take 90,000 times $2.60 and then add that to $21,000 of fixed cost. And so you could literally plot a line based on this equation: total fixed cost of 21,000 plus variable cost per unit of $2.60. So now we move to the flexible budget for the month of May, and you will notice that in the column to the left I have the budgeted numbers based on the variable cost per unit. And so direct materials is $80 per unit. That is derived by taking the 40,000 and dividing it by 50,000 units. Why 50,000? Because that's the level of activity that was used to prepare the budget. And so we're now adjusting it, flexing it up to 55,000. So 55,000 times 80 would give you 44,000. We compared that with the actual, which was given here, and we now see that there is a favorable difference of 3,000. Why is it favorable? Because the actual cost for direct materials fell below the budgeted of 44,000. Similarly, direct labor, we take the budgeted direct labor cost of 45, divide that by 50,000 units, and that turns out to be 90 cents per unit. And so at a $55,000 unit level of activity, it works out to 49,500. We compare that with the actual of 47.3. That gives us a favorable difference of 2,200. A similar process is done for each of the variable costs. 30 cents per unit for indirect materials is obtained by taking the budgeted indirect materials of 15,000 and dividing that by 50,000 units. And then to scale that up to the $55,000 level of activity, we take the unit cost, multiply it by the 55,000 units, and we get 16.5. We do the same thing for indirect labor, 35 cents per unit times 55. Utilities, 20 cents per unit times 55, we get 11,000. And for maintenance, it's 15 cents per unit times 55,000 units, and we get our budgeted cost. We then compare each of the line items in the variable cost against the budgeted, and you notice that if your actual is less, the difference will be favorable. If it were larger, it would be unfavorable. But in this case, as the manager was expecting, we have favorable results in every single line item. And so we indicate that with an F to the right for each of these line items. Fixed cost, we are anticipating no change within the relevant range as the activity level changes. That's the nature of fixed cost by definition. And so you will notice that the budgeted and the actual for fixed stay the same. So the variance is 0, and so there is no designation of favorable or unfavorable. And so the only change that occurred in the budget versus the actual resulted from the variable cost, and so the overall budget variance is a favorable total of $8,900. And so we indicate F with a favorable. And so as I indicated here, the flexible budget provides us with a better apples to apples comparison compared with a static budget that would essentially be comparing apples with fruits. Not as beneficial for making decisions as the flexible budget. Part C of the problem asks us to make an adjustment for the actual cost. We are assuming now that the actual level of performance for June was 40,000 units as opposed to 55, so there is almost a 27% drop, well, a little more than 27% drop in the activity level. And the variable cost, actual variable cost, was 40% less than it was in the month of May. And so if you took each of these actual costs and multiplied by 20% and then subtract, you would get the actual cost for the month of June. Similarly, and actually quite faster, if you took the actual cost for each line item and multiplied by 80%. Since there was a 20% drop in the cost, multiplied by 80%, you would get the actual cost for each line item for the month of June. If you were dealing with an increase in the cost, then you could take the percentage increase and add it to the original cost, or you could multiply the original number by 1.20. Let's say, for example, there was a 20% increase in the cost for the subsequent month compared to the prior month. But in this case, we're working with a 20% decrease in the cost for June compared with the variable cost for May. And so we have, again, the same calculations. We're taking our unit cost of 80 cents for direct materials, multiplying it by 40,000 units. So the budgeted number is 32. Our actual cost for direct materials is 32,800, which is taking the actual cost in May of 41,000, multiplying it by 0.80 and getting 32,800. You do the same thing for direct labor. You take the unit cost of 90 cents, multiply by 40,000 units, you get 36,000. For the actual direct labor, you would take the amount for the month of May and multiply that by 0.80. You follow the same pattern all the way through with your indirect materials. Notice the unit cost is constant. Multiplied by the new activity level of 40,000, that's our budgeted cost for indirect labor. Actual is the prior month's cost multiplied by 0.80, and we do that all the way through until we get to the end. And so when you add all of your actual cost, you're now looking at a budgeted level of 104 compared with the actual of 107, which is unfavorable, $3,280, which is also equal to the sum of the individual variances. So here we're comparing 32 with 32.8. That's unfavorable because the actual exceeded the budgeted at the 40,000 units level of activity by $800. Similarly, we have 36 is what we were budgeting, but we actually incurred a cost for direct labor of $37,840. So that's a difference which is unfavorable of $1,840. Again, you would do the same thing for each line item, and we see that in each case the actual exceeded the budget by the respective amounts, and so we ended with an overall situation of $3,280. And so no change was anticipated and realized with the fixed cost, and so the overall variance, the budget variance of $3,280 is due exclusively to the fact that the activity level fell, and more importantly, notice that the activity level fell by 27% from 55,000 units down to 40, but the cost, the variable cost per unit fell by 20%. And so I am not surprised, you should not be either, that in each case we saw an unfavorable budget variance, and essentially that budget variance is due to a price being the issue.